Welcome. So this is the last part of the rebirth story. This is clip number 8, and we're now going to read the last 5 pages. So in the previous video, the person has this moment of doubt after all the studies. He's kind of come far in his journey, but then there's a moment of if there's any use for what he's learning, or if it's just a nice hobby. And then he has a few questions and doubts, and then he gets like a flood of answers as to why it has an effect on him, and how he sees the world, and how it's useful, and how it starts a continuous process also in some sense that will grow way beyond just this summer that he's sitting in. So now for the last few pages. It became a long morning in splendid weather and people coming and leaving in the cafe. I would consider the wealth of human knowledge I had learned from the classical world and from Dante. I would sometimes think of this to understand a social situation, or trying to predict how something would proceed and develop. And it would make it easier and more interesting to meet people, have an informal chat, or engage in deeper discussions about different topics about people, politics, or the world. I had not fully seen how this knowledge was the repository of useful examples and long-term experience gathered over centuries or millennia. Much of the world had changed, but much of the human nature would remain the same, I thought. And this was before I started to think about the learning from history in itself, the rise and fall of cultures, empires, nations, and the vast variety of dynamics that could also influence the developments in our own times, being used to understand and predict the coming few years of my own life as well. I was living in a sheltered little world in my local square with coffee and sunshine, but I would also spend some time considering the near future for the town and for my country. It was good to prepare, or sometimes also discuss with friends and try to influence the course of events, to something good and inspiring for the future. And these were only the first few thoughts that went through my mind as I lifted the cup again and looked at the church front and then the beautiful tree next to the cafe. I felt like there was still so much to learn, and the joy of understanding was getting almost addictive. Expanding the mind and perspective was a gift in itself, and made the life of the mind even more entertaining and useful. A few dotted clouds were gliding over the skies, and some birds were sitting on the church roof. I rested my shoulders again and leaned back in the chair. I had almost finished the Purgatory and wanted to read a bit more, but was still caught up in the reflections. Both the knowledge and the thinking had been helpful for me to understand the world and the history, but it had also opened up some new questions for me. How the knowledge was understood in the mind, and the effects of expanding my own thinking into new areas of substance, and also the brain in itself. I paused a little and then stepped back. I wanted to focus on the culture and history of the past times first, and then explore these other topics. There were still areas of the Roman Empire I needed to know more about, a few more Greek philosophers and myths, and the whole process of resurfacing this knowledge in the Renaissance after being dormant for almost 1,000 years. The renewal of this era had generated something new in the 1400s, inspired by the old, but given a new shape and form by the current times at the time. It was a slightly different age, and the new arts, literature, and science had emerged as a distinct process in Florence, building on the old, but with an enthusiasm, beauty, and speed that was seldom seen in history. I started to wonder what it had felt like, living in those times, as the forces of talent and energy had gathered and multiplied in one little town. Perhaps it was partly that exact feeling that was captured and expressed in the artworks, an emotion of energy, beauty, and exploding optimism for humanity. Perhaps this was something we could learn from the paintings of Botticelli, Da Vinci, Raffaello, or Ghirlandaio, I thought quietly. Maybe this is a secret gift embedded in their works. And then I finally picked up the book again and was ready to read, with a bigger love for history and knowledge than ever before. So this just builds on that moment in the previous clip where he has some doubts, and then he gets all the reflections on about how this is useful, and now it keeps evolving. Like it's broadening his view and understanding of how this is helpful, and especially in this case again, like for the Italian kind of for the Italian history up to the Renaissance. Okay, towards the end of the summer, the day finally arrived when I could look back on a long summer of deep studies in the old ancient world and into the Renaissance. The shadows in the little square were slightly longer, and the green on the leaves had faded a little, but still strong and fertile, and with infinite beauty, as the tree was standing with me next to the cafe. The tree here is a symbol of nature, mainly. You can interpret it in many different ways, but it's there to remind us, like it's about humans, human history, and about culture, but nature is also very important, and just the beauty of a tree. So that's kind of why it's a part of his experience, and kind of when you read this little story, that the tree is there. I looked at the fountain and the angels, and then at my table. The book was now the third one in the comedy, and there were only a few pages left. And next to it, the usual morning espresso and a notebook full of thoughts, reflections, and new ideas that had grown out of these summer wanderings into the old knowledge of my own culture and history. It had become a little gold mine of memories, discoveries, and beauty of new emotions, as I had been connecting my life and my surroundings more and more into the bigger realm of deep history and the expanse of human life, nature, and foundation. How the deeper roots of the Roman Empire and Greek philosophy was evident and present in everything around me, and in how people were thinking, acting, and building their lives, often without being aware of this bigger context. This is one of the main kind of realizations this person has, that he suddenly sees the long lines and the impact of the old ancient times in all sorts of ways around him. And as the bigger context gradually had become more visible and revealed to me, I had been filled with a bigger gratitude towards my ancestors and a newfound feeling of liberty in my own existence through the understanding of my life and through the increased predictability of current times and how to evaluate the events of the day. And as these thoughts were passing through my mind, I also discovered how these perspectives were new and somehow like little buds that I could tend to and watch grow in many years to come. Living from this moment with a broader view of the world that would also change my view of the memories and the process of learning from here too. So now it comes to even a broader reflection and realization in the person. It was an unfamiliar feeling of substance and robustness in the mind, and a feeling of insight and a visual paradise of arts, paintings, and architecture from thousands of years. It became a solemn moment of seeing myself as an incredible small part of this, through my life and being, and then a feeling of companionship and warmth, that this had been given and maintained over the centuries. It provided my own life with context and meaning and the joy of life. And this had been dormant or silently present all around me for my whole life. This is also something you can feel when you are if you travel and live in Italy for a while, and then you start digging, and then suddenly you see like just the wealth of it. I stopped and lifted the coffee. I had been prepared for discoveries through this journey into history, but not expecting this. The sun was over my face again, and I closed my eyes to listen to the fountain water and some distant voices. My mind changed into pure emotion, and floating images of sunshine, landscapes, oceans, and old cathedrals with mesmerizing frescos and ornaments on the facades. And then Greek temples in Sicily, and old Greeks walking in the gardens and discussing philosophy. And then just a vague feeling of red and yellow, floating lightly, and a mild emotion of paradise. I sat like this for maybe a few minutes. It was impossible to know. And when I opened my eyes, there was a more clear and detailed view of the square and of the beauty of the surroundings. I smiled in silence. And then I picked up the book and opened the last few pages of the Paradiso. My studies of old times were about to end for now, and the pilgrim was about to complete his journey too. I don't have much to add to this. It's just an effort to describe kind of the rewards you can get and the beauty of it, and just like the gifts that you can get from it. About half an hour later, I would close the book, and with that, the classical world and the Renaissance had changed me, and their place in me forever. Or it had transformed me into something different, the beginning of a different, ever-changing mind that would absorb and perceive the world through a continuous process of learning into a bigger frame than before. It was like me was not just me anymore. I was also a piece or a living part of a much bigger tradition that was expressing itself through me. Or I could choose to do so if I wanted. And this context made the sense of being different as well. I felt both stronger as myself and as a part of this culture. The culture that had produced this foundation of ancient wisdom and beauty, and the eruption and rebirth of this world through the Renaissance and the centuries thereafter. For a second, I felt like I had not seen this clearly enough in my earlier self, the one from just before the summer. So this is a big, big, big moment when you suddenly see, well, you go through a change, and then just do, like in this case, it's like this morning, but a little bit before is you can view it from the outside because you have changed yourself, and then you see the remembrance of how you were just a bit earlier as a different person. But then I realized that it had always been there by instinct and by interest. It had grown naturally in me, all by itself, like a plant growing from a seed into what it eventually had become. And then I felt the sun in a different way over me and waited a bit longer. So this is also one of those big things you can experience in life when you make choices based more on intuition or on instinct, or like following your heart sometimes, which is kind of a complicated issue, following your brain or your heart, but let's say instinct, and then it kind of builds a path, or it builds a future for you, and then at some point you look back and you can see exactly why it happened. You understand that this is kind of an expression of who you really are, and you didn't know that maybe 10 years before, but this is this is how it works in some ways, like a plant growing from the seed. So, and then I looked at the fountain, and there it was, the whole tradition of the ancient world, symbolized and expressed in the little Renaissance angel statues. They now embodied this whole world in their relaxed beauty, with blinking drops of water and golden sunlight over them. There it was, right in front of me, the living world of my old history and culture, with ease, beauty, and boundless wisdom. I smiled, had a last sip of the espresso, and could not clearly remember who I had been only that morning. A new day had come, and the old had once again become new, like a tree blossoming in all its splendor in spring. I felt fortunate, life regenerating, and this time it was within myself. That's the ending. So, yeah, I don't have much to add to this. Just this, like, the little message from those little Renaissance angels that they knew it all along, and they see like a young person, and they're patiently standing and waiting with their wisdom and their beauty and and all the depth in it, and then from their view, like, this person is going through a little blossoming, and they have seen it so many times before. Yeah, and also an important point that this also changes the person into not seeing kind of seeing yourself as as a part of something bigger, which is a natural consequence often of this. Okay, so just gonna wrap it up here. So it's like a tree blossoming and within the person. Okay, so to those who've been following the whole series, thank you so much for watching. I hope some of this has been interesting or inspirational, or given some new thoughts. And yeah, so just a big thank you, and have a great day.